Okay, let's just dive right into this whiteboard explainer. Today, we're mapping out the precise historical and economic steps that a fringe extremist actually took to legally dismantle a democracy, literally from the inside out. We're going to impartially trace a strictly factual cause and effect timeline here, just based on the historical accounts, so we can see exactly how this devastating transformation occurred. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with early life, then World War I, the Nazi Party origins, the economic crisis, becoming the chancellor, and finally, absolute dictatorship. Let's get into it. All right, Section 1, Early Life and Radicalization. Let's look at the very foundation of his extreme ideology. Following this timeline on the board, we're looking at a young man born in 1889 in Austria-Hungary, who had a pretty turbulent upbringing. He clashed relentlessly with his strict, quick-tempered father, who was an Austrian public official, by the way. So as an act of teenage defiance, he leaned heavily into German nationalism. He struggled in high school, repeated a grade, and actually ended up dropping out entirely without taking his final exams. He wanted to be an artist, but after both his father and his beloved mother passed away, he moved to Vienna to take an art school entrance exam. And he failed. Destitute, zero parental support, he ends up jobless and living on the streets in his early 20s. Now, living in and out of homeless shelters and making just this meager living selling painted postcards, this is where his horrific beliefs truly began to take shape. Vienna's political climate was intense. The city's mayor, who he supported, was outspokenly anti-Semitic. Our drifter avidly read right-wing conspiracy newsletters, basically absorbing the widespread anti-Semitism and these totally baseless theories about racial hierarchies that were just everywhere in the city at the time. By 1913, he drifted over to Munich, Germany, specifically to dodge military service for the multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian Empire that he'd really come to despise. Moving on to Section 2, World War I and defeat. The sudden outbreak of a global conflict gave this drifter a violent new purpose. When World War I erupted in 1914, he immediately volunteered for the German army. For him, the war actually provided brotherhood. It gave him a sense of belonging. He was reportedly a brave soldier, won the Iron Cross, and survived multiple close brushes with death. But then, in 1918, he was temporarily blinded by a British gas attack. And it was while he was lying there recovering in a hospital bed that he learned the absolutely devastating news of Germany's surrender and the incredibly humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So here's the crucial point. He channeled all that intense anger and thirst for vengeance into a scapegoating myth. He became totally obsessed with the so-called stabbed-in-the-back theory. He drew a direct, false line of blame right to communists and Jews. In his mind, they had spread dissent and anti-war propaganda on the home front. He convinced himself the army hadn't actually lost on the battlefield at all, but were betrayed from within. Okay, Section 3, the Nazi Party origins. Let's see how this bubbling, toxic hatred built into a highly organized political threat. Drawing a line from his army days, get this, he was actually employed as a government informant. His job? Infiltrate a suspicious fringe group called the German Workers' Party. But instead of just reporting back on them, he realizes, wow, they share my exact extreme right-wing views. So he leaves the army, uses his fantastic speaking abilities to completely take over the party's leadership, and basically rebrands it as the Nazi Party. To protect his meetings and intimidate anyone who disagreed, he recruited unemployed, heavily trained soldiers to form a paramilitary wing. This became known as the ominous Storm Detachment, or the SA. Emboldened by this new power, in November 1923, he literally attempted a violent revolution by storming a Munich beer hall, thinking the police would join him. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Shots were fired and the whole thing collapsed. Now you'd think, committing high treason during this beer hall putsch would be the end of the road, right? That's a crime that could carry a life sentence. But he was incredibly lucky. Sympathetic right-wing judges gave him what basically amounted to a shocking slap on the wrist, a 5-year sentence, of which he only served 9 months, and in remarkably comfortable conditions, too. He flipped this trial into a massive public PR stunt, gaining fame nationwide. He even used his cell time to write his infamous book. Which brings us to Section 4, Economic Crisis and Opportunism, because this is where sheer economic catastrophe really cemented his rise to power. So, the weak, newly formed democratic government of Germany was absolutely desperate to pay war reparations to the Allies. Their solution? Just print more money. Well, that triggered a devastating hyperinflation spiral. The currency crashed so spectacularly that the price of a single loaf of bread exploded to 200 billion marks. Just look at the sheer shock value of this data on the board. By December 1923, one single US dollar cost 4.2 trillion German marks. Banknotes were literally worthless. The public's life savings were completely wiped out overnight. Things got so bad that the French actually occupied a German factory region just to seize goods as payment, which ended up resulting in the deaths of over 100 German civilians. But if we compare these two distinct eras, we see an incredible shift. Even with his newfound fame from the trial, in the 1928 elections, the Nazis won a really dismal 2% of the vote. Everyday Germans were just put off by his extreme violence and how, well, unpolitician-like he was. But then, the 1929 Wall Street crash happened. America recalled its loans to Germany, unemployment skyrocketed, poverty became totally widespread. The desperate German public, completely sick of a failing democracy, began actively moving to the political extremes. Suddenly, they felt forced to choose between the communists and the Nazis. All right, Section 5, Becoming the Chancellor. We're now charting out the massive political blunder that sealed the nation's fate. Capitalizing on this immense economic crisis, the Nazi Party cranked up the heavy propaganda. They offered the German people a scapegoat for their suffering and promised the supposedly strong leadership of a dictator. Caught up in the hype and the desperation, voters flocked to the polls. By 1932, the Nazis surged to become the absolute biggest party in the German parliament. Riding this megalomaniacal high, he demanded to be made chancellor. Take a look at this quote. "How about we make Hitler chancellor? We'll control Hitler like he's our angry little puppet. What could possibly go wrong?" I mean, that quote from conservative politician Franz von Papen is just absolutely chilling in retrospect, isn't it? The extremely popular president, World War I General Paul von Hindenburg, was highly reluctant to appoint him because of his blatant racism. But moderate conservatives and wealthy industry leaders secretly negotiated a backroom deal. Fearing the rise of communism, they convinced Hindenburg to hand over the chancellorship. They arrogantly and, quite frankly, foolishly believed they could easily control him and just maintain their own grip on power. And finally, Section 6, Absolute Dictatorship and Terror. Let's deconstruct exactly how unyielding terror was systematically implemented across an entire society. Step by step, right here on the board, we can literally see a republic being legally dismantled from the inside in just a matter of months. In January 1933, he gets appointed chancellor. Just 1 month later, the German parliament building, the Reichstag, is suspiciously set on fire. He immediately blames the communists, using the ensuing panic to convince President Hindenburg to sign an emergency decree. This allowed him to legally imprison his political rivals in the very first concentration camp at Dachau. Shortly after that, the elderly Hindenburg passes away, and the chancellor immediately passes a law giving himself the power to make all future laws and decisions entirely on his own. He still had one major hurdle left, though. The regular, professionally trained German army absolutely hated his rowdy paramilitary group, the SA. So, to secure the regular army's loyalty, he orchestrated a brutal, bloody purge in June 1934, famously known as the Night of the Long Knives. He had his own SA officers rounded up and murdered. He also used the utter chaos to brutally settle personal scores with past political opponents and even reporters. Up to 200 people were dead by the end of the week. Satisfied by this show of force, the regular army officially pledged total allegiance to their new dictator. The result of these laws was an unimaginable nightmare. Life in Germany changed violently and permanently. Every single basic freedom, press, expression, assembly, was gone. Jewish businesses were boycotted, which started a dark, systematic descent that eventually led to the horrific murder of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced into sterilization for physical and mental imperfections. The youth were completely brainwashed in camps. Boys returned violent, girls were instructed to breed pure children for the state. And if horrified parents dared to object, their own brainwashed children would threaten to turn them over to the terrifying secret police, the Gestapo. As we step back and look at this entire completed whiteboard, we've impartially mapped out a truly profound historical tragedy. What began as an angry drifter wandering the streets of Vienna became a global catastrophe, and it all happened because of extreme economic ruin, deeply disastrous political compromises by the establishment, and a catastrophic underestimation of radical ideology. I'm leaving you with this final thought to ponder as we wipe the board clean today. It's a really stark reminder from history. When desperate times hit and true economic despair takes hold, are the established structures of a democracy genuinely strong enough to withstand the meticulous blueprint of a dictator? Thank you for walking through this explainer with me, and keep questioning the history that shapes our world.